Join us at Women of Courage and celebrate the achievements of women. Before we begin, we're going to take a few moments to collect ourselves and to relax before we engage into our discussion. What we need to do is to focus now on bringing positive energy into our lives and into the world. The energy that we project every day is the same energy that we get back. We have all seen those people that can walk into a room and they glow. People want to be around them. People feel better being in their presence. That's the energy that we need to create. And once we learn how to do this, our lives will be filled with greatness. We will attract that positive energy. And how we can do this is by changing our outlook, meeting every day with gratitude, thankfulness, optimism, and once you do this, you will see a change in yourself. I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Think about everything positive in your life. Family, friends, a career, your faith. All of this is how you start your day. Every morning when you wake up, I want you to think about what is positive in your life. I want you to list 10 reasons why your life is amazing. You will see the change. You will be changed. You will begin to attract life's blessings. Lead with gratitude. Be thankful and think positive. Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in. This is Gloria Lee, the moderator for the show Women of Courage. Wherever you are in the world, I need you to know one thing right now. You are amazing. I know you might be upset. I know you might be hurting. And I know you might be frustrated. I know because all of these things happened to me. I was homeless for 2 years, and all I had was a computer, my son, and a car. I want you to know you still have a purpose in life, and it is my job to help you believe that again. Do you want to believe? Can you see that the divorce was not meant to take you out? Can you believe that the lost house and the lost job is a setup for something greater? By the end of this broadcast, you'll be injected with so much that you cannot help but believe again. And I am going to help you do just that. Are you ready? I got some things I want to share with you. And I will even make suggestions on books and activities that you can implement, which will ultimately bring healing and wholeness to you. If you are ready to be healed, if you're ready to be whole, just jot down the pointers I give and watch your life transform. No matter what happened, no matter whose fault it was, today is a new day, and your time to live and be free is now. Join me in this journey to wholeness. Your time for total healing is now. Today you shall recover. Wholeness, healness, and peacefulness is in the mind. That is where all battles for life end and begin. Domestic violence is often bound by ignorance, yet it is one of the most important topics of modern time. Domestic violence involves half of the world's population. Although you think that domestic violence is something that happens far, far away, and that it is impossible that it is happening to you. You will be shocked to know that at least several of you are either a victim or you know someone who is a victim of domestic violence. According to the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, an average of 20 people per minute experience intimate partner abuse every minute, and every 1 in 3 women have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner during their lifetime. Things get even worse when we know that slightly more than half of female victims of domestic violence live in households with children under the age of 12. Think about it. If a young boy is watching his mother get beaten by his father, how do you think he will behave when he grows up? He will learn that it is okay to beat women, to insult women, and to humiliate them. Even worse, when young girls witness domestic violence, she will learn it's okay for men to beat women. Therefore, her chances of becoming the victims are far greater because this environment of domestic violence becomes normal to her. As you can see, it doesn't take a bruise for a child to be a victim of domestic violence. Kids who witness domestic violence are also victims. So, how is this possible? How is it possible that such destructive and horrible things like domestic violence happen so often and to so many women and children? Why don't they say something? The other day I was reading a story that happened in 2007 about a young girl. Her name was Pam, who got pregnant with her boyfriend and they decided to get married. Her sister said she wasn't sure if she should marry him and that on her wedding day she was the saddest bride ever. One night Pam told her sister that she doesn't want to get married, explaining that he often yells at her and sometimes he doesn't even permit her to leave the house. She also said it would be bad for her children to grow up without a father, that he can provide financial security, and that he will improve once they get married. Her sister told her that she doesn't have to be afraid, that she can raise her children on her own, and that she shouldn't marry him only because he can provide financial security. That mustn't be the reason for you to marry him, she said. That definitely will not be good for the child. In fact, it would certainly be wrong. Unfortunately, Pam didn't listen. She married him after all. Later, her hope of him improving completely vanished as he continued in the same behavior. Baby was born. Things got worse. He would press her against the wall or to the floor and humiliate her by saying horrible things. Things went even further as he could get into her online account and controlled everything. Her sister kept saying to Pam to get out or there, but Pam would not listen. He will get better, he will calm down, she would say. Time for red flags was when he got a gun. He said it was for protection, but pretty soon Pam found herself with the gun being pointed to her head. He told her if she ever tried to leave him, he would kill her and the child would grow up without a mother. Pam started searching for ways out, but unfortunately it was too late. One night, 2 uniformed men rang the door at Pam's sister's home. They told her they found Pam and her husband dead at their home. Pam was killed and her husband committed suicide. He looked into her online accounts and found her chatting with an old boyfriend. He killed her because of this. Just because she was afraid that she would not be able to raise her child on her own to provide financial security, Pam was killed. Fortunately, there are thousands of stories just like this, and the reason women stay in these kinds of relationships are almost always the same. The most disturbing part of this is that women accept domestic violence as part of their life. What does this mean? This means that if a woman is subjugated to domestic violence, she won't say anything to anyone because she is afraid. She is afraid that she won't be able to manage her life by herself. She is afraid of what people will say if she divorces, and she is afraid for her child. No one's life should look like this. Freedom is not when you choose to stay in a relationship with your abuser. It is not sacrificing yourself just because someone made you believe you depend on him. Freedom is about love and caressing for each other, and we keep quiet and close our eyes, we won't be able to help other women who are in danger. So I tell you, it is our moral duty to speak and do something about this issue. If you think you are a victim of domestic violence, come and speak to someone. Talk to a police officer, a counselor, or your spiritual advisor. If you know someone that you think is a domestic victim, reach out to her and talk to her. If you were a victim of domestic violence and you were able to manage to get out, share your story, give hope to other victims. Together we can help victims, and precisely because we can, we must. I am going to pause for a second to take a short break while you listen to information regarding willpower and encouragement. It is all a matter of learning new behaviors. And please remember, it is easier to build strong minds than to repair injured people. What I said is a modification of a quote by Frederick Douglass. He said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." Now for my break. Before we begin this part of the show, I would like to state that we are presenting this information to show the flip side of domestic violence. There are several consequences to domestic violence. This is one side that very few people look at. We're going to look at the side where the man commits an act of murder. He kills his or her wife or his girlfriend, and these are the consequences that he suffers after his act of violence. The first woman that we're going to discuss is Miss Lisa, last name Filliaggi. She was 27 years old and she was the mother of two children. She lived in Lorain, Ohio. She was buried in her wedding dress January 1994 because her ex husband refused to leave her alone. She married James J. Figagetti, age 28, December 1991, but she divorced him 9 months later. The speed of their divorce tells you that Mr. Figagetti was a problem. Mr. Figagetti persisted in his abuse until Lisa obtained a protection order. The order did not help her because he shot her to death January 24th, 1994. He shot her 4 times after she ran into a neighbor's home. Mr. Figagetti was a bully, plain and simple. When he was shooting Lisa for the third and fourth time, he said, "This will teach you to fuck with me." There was no other sentence for Mr. Figagetti but death, and that is exactly what an Ohio jury gave him. James J. Filliaggi was executed April 24th, 2007. He was 41 years old. His final words were, "Capital punishment is no deterrent to crime." You'll have to excuse me in this discussion. Many of the names I do not know how to pronounce. Next woman that we will discuss, her name was Patty, Fugate. She also was a mother of two children. The prosecutors in Georgia said on May 4th, 1991, Mr. Fugate violated a restraining order and entered Patty Fugate's home. He waited until she returned, then he shot her in the head. Her son was present. Mr. Fugate contended that he shot his wife by accident, saying that the gun fired as he tried to push her into a car. The couple was divorced. He was sentenced to death. Judge William Pryor signed his death warrant, and a few hours later, his execution date was set. Critics say that his trial, which was held in Putnam County Superior Court in 1992, lasted only 2 days. It was among the shortest trials in history for a capital offense, and the hearing in which he was sentenced to death lasted only 27 minutes, less than an average real estate closing. Wallace M. Fugay III, age 52, was executed August 16, 2002, for the murder of his ex-wife. He had nothing to say at his death. Now we move to Florida. There are 5 people that we're going to discuss in this case. The person is Miss Edna Washington. She was pregnant. Mr. Walter Washington. Their 2 children, Terrence and Reginald, age 4 and 14 respectively, and then a Mr. Larry Finney. These persons were murdered because a man was angry at his wife who was trying to escape him. The murder of Miss Edna Washington, her husband Walter Washington, and their friend Larry Finney, and their children Terrence and Reginald Washington, was definitely a death penalty case. The men in this case should have been executed. Instead, they are living out their lives in a Florida prison. Miss Washington and her family was killed because Karen Jackson, the wife of Douglas M. Jackson, age 24, she left him and moved in with the Washingtons. Apparently, Mr. Jackson was abusive, causing his wife to leave him. He was angry that his wife left him and moved in with the Washingtons, so he decided to kill the Washingtons. Mr. Jackson enlisted the help of Mr. Aubrey Livingston, age 24. March 1st, 1981. The 2 men accosted the Washington family and their friend Larry Finney along a highway. Edna Washington and her husband Walter and Mr. Finney were shot to death. The car was doused with gasoline and set afire. The Washington children, Terrence and Reginald, were alive when the car was set afire. In less than 15 minutes, Mr. Jackson and Mr. Livingston had taken the lives of 5 people. Mr. Jackson's anger was quenched. Mr. Jackson's wife was present during the killings because she testified in her husband's trial. She heard shots and saw smoke. Douglas Jackson was tried and convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping. He received 2 death sentences. Since he was afraid of being executed, Mr. Jackson underwent 4 trials. He was finally sentenced to life without parole. He has been incarcerated since December 2nd, 1981. He was 24 years old when he killed the Washington family. He has been in prison 30 years. Mr. Aubrey Livingston was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping. He suffered a similar fate. He has been in prison 30 years. Miss Valerie McDonald from Illinois was shot to death after leaving church and getting ready to enter her home with her family. The people who shot her to death were 2 interlopers. One was the husband's mistress. These people were sentenced to death, but the death sentences for Eddie Williams and Geraldine Smith were both vacated by the Illinois Supreme Court. Eddie Williams was finally resentenced to life in prison without parole. Geraldine Smith gets a chance at a new life. She was scheduled for parole February the 24th, 2008. Imagine, her friends told the court she was a caring person and a good mother, but she was the ones that instigated the murder of Valerie McDonald. It's to go home and hug her children. The only person who does not get a reprieve is Miss Valerie McDonald. She is still dead. When will Miss McDonald hug her children? We are going to discuss another woman who was a rejected mistress. she ended up killing Rachel Perez in California. The woman, she too was described as an excellent and caring person, yet she murdered at the drop of a hat just like Geraldine Smith. This is why the National Institute of the Study of Violence says if your husband is committing adultery, you must accept the fact that your life and the lives of your children are in danger, and you should act accordingly to protect yourself because you are now in the way of your husband's mistress and his happiness and the happiness of his mistress. You do not know how intense your husband's daydreaming has become. November the 24th, 1911, Mr. Henry Beatty, Jr. was executed for the murder of his wife. Mr. Beatty was committing suicide, he was committing adultery while his wife was pregnant. He murdered her shortly after she gave birth to their child. You can also do not want the situation to end with the mistress killing you. Many men feel that the only answer to their dilemma is murdering the wife. That was done by attorney Michael Fletcher in Michigan. That was also done by Robert Marshall and also done by a Dr. Finch. All of these men killed their wives. They had mistresses. When Mr. Marshall was tried for murdering his wife, Maria Marshall, he said, "I didn't want to do away with her. I wanted to just get away from her." He did not mention the $1.5 million insurance policy that he had taken out on his wife's life, or the suffering her two children would endure at the loss of their mother. The only thing he was concerned with was his happiness. So we say again, if your husband is committing adultery, you need to start thinking about your safety. Once you learn that your husband is committing adultery, you are no longer safe. The situation is not volatile. Remember Carol Newlander? She was bludgeoned to death in her home in 1994 at the behest of her husband, Rabbi Fred Newlander. Her husband was committing adultery. His mistress had given him an ultimatum: me or your wife. Rather than obtain a divorce, Mr. Newlander wanted to maintain his status in the community. He wanted everything: the house, the car, the love of his children without their mother, and the family funds. The only solution to his dilemma was murder. Rabbi Newlander is not the only man in this country after committing adultery that asked the question, "What am I to do?" and found murder to be the answer to this question. In 1964, Mr. Harry Belcher made the decision to murder his wife after committing adultery. In 1970, Mr. Howard Holder made the decision to murder his wife after committing adultery. In 2001, Mr. Eric Parson, age 25 of New York, and Mr. Christian Longer, 27 of Oregon, made a decision to murder their wife because they were weary of marriage. Since you do not know when your husband will ask this question of himself, you need to be proactive and plot your course to safety. I am going to pause for a second to take a short break while you listen to information regarding willpower and encouragement. It is all a matter of learning new behaviors. And please remember, it is easier to build strong minds than to repair injured people. What I said is a modification of a quote by Frederick Douglass. He said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." Now for my break.
You need to live life with a purpose. You need to spend the time needed to explore, to find your true passion. There are so many unhappy people in this world not willing to make a change. There are so many unhappy people not focusing on the big picture. 1 out of 3 people are happy with their lives. Think about that for a second. 70% of the people you see every day are not happy. And the majority of that has to do with purpose. People are programmed, wired to be okay with the minimum. People stay in jobs they're not passionate about. They date people who don't support them, hang out with people who don't help them grow. This can't be you. You need to spend the time to discover what your true calling is. What are you passionate about? What do you see yourself doing to make your mark? Are you in a job right now that you're truly happy with? Do you wake up every morning excited to start your day? If not, that's okay. You know now this isn't fulfilling you. But what are you gonna do about it? Are you willing to make a change to help reach your goals? If you are, it needs to start now. Because this won't happen overnight, finding your true calling. But once you do, you will see how everything changes. You will begin to see the quality of your life increase. All those problems you had, they slowly fade. You begin to see how powerful life is with a purpose. Anything that you want in this life can be obtained. You just need to believe. Believe in yourself. You are strong. You are beautiful. You are resilient. You are what we call the women of courage. And your time is now. There are no victims in this life. So I'm asking you, are you ready to make a change? Are you ready to fight for what you want? Are you ready to fight for your dreams? If you are, it starts now. This is the Women of Courage.
Now we are going to discuss women like Miss Heather, Garraus, and Miss Valerie McDonald, who had their lives taken from them because their husbands felt free to commit adultery. The first woman we're going to discuss is Roseanne. Her last name is Gailiunas. She was 33 and she was a mother. She lived in Richardson, Texas. She was married to a physician. In 1983, Roseanne G. hired a Mr. Aylor to build their home. The prosecutor believes that a relationship began between Miss G and Mr. Aylor. He was the contractor. 5 months after the contract, Mr. Aylor filed for a divorce. 1 week later, Roxanne G sued her husband for a divorce. They used the same divorce attorney. Once the relationship was exposed, Mr. Aylor moved out of his home and Miss G moved out of her home. The death of Roxanne G was the result of that decision. Miss Joy Aylor, she was the wife of Mr. Aylor, was convicted October 4th, 1983. Miss G was stripped nude, strangled, shot twice in the back of the head, then bound to her bed. May 26, 1988, Miss Joy Janine Aylor, 38, was charged with capital murder for allegedly hiring a contract killer to strangle and shoot and kill Roxanne G. Mrs. Joy Aylor, age 39, was indicted on charges of capital murder in the death of Mrs. Roxanne G, who was allegedly having an affair with Miss Aylor's husband. Miss Aylor of Dallas, Texas, was also indicted on 2 charges of solicitation of capital murder and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit capital murder in the 1986 attack on her husband, Larry Ayler. The grand jury indicted a William Wesley Garland, age 48, Brian Lee Creeth, age 35, Buster James Matthews, age 46, and William Gary Matthews, age 37, and Joseph Walter Thomas, age 46. All these men were charged with the murder of Roxanne G. Joy Ayler had been married to her husband for 18 years. Joy Ayler's father was a home builder. She was the one that had the money. Her father helped her husband establish his home building company. Once Miss Ayler was arrested, her ex-husband filed to have the divorce settlement set aside. He wanted the money, honey. Once Miss Ayler was arrested, her ex-husband felt that a divorce would no longer serve his interest. Miss Ayler received a life sentence in 1994 for her role in the death of Roxanne G, but she would be eligible for parole at some point in time. George Anderson Hooper was paid about $1,500 for killing Roxanne G. He was executed March 8, 2005 at the age of 49. Richardson police arrested Joy Davis Ayler in May 1988 for allegedly paying to have her estranged husband girlfriend murdered. Miss Ayler was charged with capital murder, solicitation, capital murder, conspiracy, capital murder and solicitation, and conspiracy to commit capital murder. The next case that we're going to discuss is the case of Ruby Nell Lindsay. She too was a mother of 2 children. After the verdict, her solicitor said, "I hope today's verdict helps the Nell's family heal from a horrific tragedy. Nell did everything she could to get away from an abusive relationship, and it wasn't enough." The solicitor went on to say, "There was no question Marion Lindsay had malice in his heart on the day of the murder. Malice is firing a gun into a car with 2 children in it. Marion Lindsay did not care where the bullets landed as long as he could kill his wife." Ruby Lindsay was shot to death September the 18th, 2002, while she was hiding in the back seat of her friend's car in the Inman Police Department parking lot in South Carolina. The police had been alerted that the car was being driven to the police station and that the car in which Ruby Lindsay was in was being followed by the irate husband. Police officers left the police department and entered the parking lot, but not before the husband of Ruby Lindsay was able to fire inside the car 4 times. But this time, after attacking his wife in the parking lot, Mr. Lindsay did not get away with it. The police officer shot him and arrested him. The murder scene was in the parking lot of a police station. Nell Lindsay was murdered the day after her husband posted a $1,000 security bond after he was arrested in 2002 on a charge of domestic violence regarding a restaurant incident where he beat his wife in the parking lot. When he was bonded out of jail, he was warned to stay away from his wife. He did not heed this warning. Mr. Lindsay did not testify during his trial. Why? Because he would have been subject to cross-examination. The pivotal moment in the penalty phase of Mr. Lindsay's trial was during the testimony of Catherine Mullinax. She testified that she and her husband saw Marion Lindsay strike Nell Lindsay twice just outside of an Applebee's restaurant in West Spartanburg, South Carolina on December 1st, 2001. Her testimony was emotionally stirring. It made one flinch. She said Mr. Lindsay hit his wife in the face with a closed fist. He just cold-cocked her, snatched his estranged wife's jewelry off of her, and threw it across the parking lot. She said Nell Lindsay tried to defend herself, but Marion Lindsay also struck her with an open hand. One could feel the slap and the insult. Mr. Lindsay had no self-control and was disrespectful. He did not care that the couple was in public. The testimony was powerful because Kathy, Mullinax, was a perfect stranger. Her testimony was not tainted by emotions colored by being a relative. She said Mr. Lindsay cold-cocked her. Regarding what the defense attorney said to the jury saw Mr. Lindsay as a mean, hateful man who hits women. Oftentimes, the murder of a woman can result in a situation where a jury has to decide, shall he be executed or shall he be sentenced to life in prison? There are three variables in this decision. Was the crime heinous and premeditated? Does the word life actually mean life in prison without parole? And does the jury understand the judge's instructions and explanation of aggravation and mitigating circumstances? The jury has already agreed that they will follow the law of the state if the prosecution proves his or her case and asks for the death penalty. The jury in the murder case of Ruby Nell Lindsay was called to decide the death of her estranged husband after convicting him of capital murder. Would Marion Lindsay be sentenced to death for murdering Ruby Lindsay, September 18, 2002, or would the jury spare his life? September 17, 2001, he was a batterer. September 18, 2002, he was a murderer. Marion Lindsay was sentenced to death. I normally do not mention in my writing the race of the women that were murdered, but I would like for the black women to understand that Marion Lindsay is a black man who murdered his wife. I want you to remember how he behaved. He played God. I can do what I want to do with my wife. Well, he's not dead yet. The last court action that we see for Mr. Marion Lindsay is February 20th, 2007. He's fighting his death sentence. The last sentence in the court record said, "We have reviewed the record and concluded the imposition of death in this case was not the result of passion, prejudice, or any arbitrary factor, nor is it excessive or disproportionate to the penalty imposed in other cases. Mr. Lindsay shall die for his behavior. The judgment of the circuit court is affirmed." I would like for you to go to the website where it states the state versus Lindsay. I want you to read how horrific this murder was. And this man has the nerve to still want to have the right to live among us.
You're watching Detroit's own WHPR TV. Detroit Live.
Hi, this is Renee stepping out on faith. You can watch me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the WHPR TV Now app. Download our free app at WHPR TV Now.
Weekdays at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Dear listeners, help us save a life. Stop breast cancer from taking lives. Will you assist us in putting the booklet Black Women and Breast Cancer in the hands of 1 million people? Please go to the website www.touchedbythelight.us and download the booklet Black Women and Breast Cancer. Then email this booklet to 5 friends, asking them to email the booklet to 5 of their friends. We are trying to reach 1 million women with this information to save lives. The death of one woman to breast cancer from our community is one woman too many. We thank you for your support. Remember, if you miss one of our shows, you can visit our YouTube channel at Touched by the Light Publishing to watch and listen to previous episodes of Women of Courage. Thank you.
Twice a month on Saturday, I meet with my listeners for a discussion about issues affecting women. Join us. For dates, times, and directions, you can reach us at murderedvoices@gmail.com. Stop thinking there's nothing you can do to change the world. Your life is important. For more information on our books or subjects discussed, email us at murderedvoices@gmail.com.
I am presenting this information to you because, again, I want to demonstrate the extent of domestic violence. What happens to our lives, our country, our community when a woman is attacked and murdered by her husband or boyfriend. Miss Kimberly Jo Barton, age 44. She is the 4th wife of her husband. She's a mother of 3. Mr. Rocky Barton lived in Waynesville, Ohio with his wife, Kimberly Barton. The husband and wife were estranged. Mr. Barton made continuous threats. Finally, Miss Barton left him. January 16, 2003, Rocky Barton, age 46, phoned his wife to come and pick up some of her belongings. When his wife arrived, Rocky Barton shot her to death, then attempted to take his own life. He was not successful. He was tried for aggravated murder. He was sentenced to death October 10th, 2003. He was executed July 12th, 2006. He waived all appeals. He knew there was no excuse for what he did. Next person we're discussing is Miss Julie Curry Boyd, age 36. Again, she's a mother of 2. December the 2nd, 2005, Kenneth Lee Boyd, age 57, became the 1,000th inmate executed in the United States since capital punishment was reinstated. Mr. Boyd was convicted of capital murder in the death of his wife, Julie Boyd, and her father, Thomas Dillard Curry, in North Carolina, March 1988. He was on death row for 17 years. Mr. Boyd was a very violent man, constantly threatening his wife once she and the children moved in with her parents. He told his children he was going to kill their mother. Was there any other sentence for this man except death? This is Marsha Yvonne Brock, age 55, and Miss Sylvia Mars Dennis, age 80. Marsha Brock and her mother, Sylvia Dennis, lived in Smith County, Texas. October the 2nd, 1991, the 2 women were shot to death. Their assailant used a shotgun. The women were shot in the head. Her husband, Thomas Wayne Mason, was arrested and charged with 2 counts of capital murder. He was tried and found guilty of 2 counts of capital murder. He was sentenced to death June 12, 2000, he was executed in the state of Texas. What other sentence could have been given to him? He murdered 2 women in cold blood. Christopher Black Sr., age 43, was executed July 9th, 2003, in the state of Texas for the murder of his wife, Gwendolyn Black, his daughter, Christina Marie Black, who was aged 15 weeks, and his step-granddaughter, Catrice Houston, which was only 17 months. When a person murders 2 children, a jury does not have any alternative sentence except the death sentence. Mr. Black shot his family to death in Killeen, Texas, February 7, 1998, in front of witnesses. He was angry that his wife wanted a divorce, so he drove to her home and shot her 10 times. Then he shot each of the children. Was he not full of hate? Christopher Black was never tried for the murder of his wife and child. He was tried and convicted for the murder of Catrice Houston. Therefore, the death sentence. Catrice Houston was 17 years old. When Mr. Mickey Wayne Davison was executed, his last words were, "I'll say my last words to the Lord." I guess that's all that really needs to be said. He murdered 3 people. Killed Mrs. Doris Jane Davison, age 36, Mamie Darnell Clacterberg, age 14, and Tammy Lynn Clacterbuck, age 13. It's quite possible that Mr. Mickey Wayne Davison of Virginia killed his wife and 2 stepdaughters June 13th, 1990, because he felt like a fool when she told him she wanted to return to her previous husband. When Miss Davison made her divorce request, she was making a comparison between her previous husband and her current husband. Mr. Davison said in his confession, "I just couldn't stand to see her go back. I just couldn't stand to see them go back." So about 10 or 11 a.m. yesterday, I just took a crowbar and killed them. Mickey Wayne Davison was executed October 19th, 1995. Even for the worst of us, a divorce is a source of humiliation. It says failure. The best location to make a divorce request is when you are 1,000 miles away and use a third party to make the request. Mrs. Linda Gilreath lived in Georgia. She was estranged from her husband, Fred Marion Gilreath, age 41. Linda Gilreath was age 28. Linda Gilreath and her father, Bill Van Llewellyn, were shot to death May 11, 1979. Miss Gilreath and her father were packing her belongings, getting her ready to move. She was in the process of divorcing her husband, Fred. Fred Gilreath was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Mr. Gilreath, age 63, was executed November 15, 2001. Mrs. Dorothy Hightower lived in Mild Edgeville, Georgia, with her 2 daughters, Evelyn Reeves, 19, and Sandra Reeves, age 22. Miss Hightower and her 2 daughters were shot to death July 12, 1987. A 3-year-old child witnessed the shooting. John Washington Hightower, age 43, was convicted and sentenced to death. He was executed June 26, 2007, at the age of 63. John and Dorothy Hightower had been divorced and then they remarried. The day of the murders, he had promised to move out because of marital problems. He told investigators that he snorted cocaine and drank alcohol that day, and that he planned to commit suicide after the shooting. but he was taken into custody before he could. Howard Seals, a Baldwin County sheriff, said he killed them because they didn't give him the respect he deserved. One day before he was scheduled for execution, June 26, 2007, he waited in his cell to see if he could be saved during a clemency hearing. The man who prosecuted Mr. Hightower's case removed all black as potential jurors during the trial. Apparently, the prosecutor believed that race would be a factor in gaining a conviction. If not, why was the technique of excluding colored jurors used? We have a case before the Supreme Court now out of Louisiana, no, it's Mississippi, where this is the fourth trial because the black jurors were excluded. White prosecutors know that black jurors are not as easily persuaded by white prosecutors as white jurors are. April 1997, Mrs. Sharon Jackson of Texas let her husband know that she planned to divorce him. His reply was to wait until April 8, 1997, as she and her daughters arrived home individually, and he strangled each of them to death. Mr. Jackson was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death for the murder of his wife, Sharon Jackson, his daughter, Erica Mays, and his other daughter, Sanseria Mays. Mr. James Lewis Jackson, age 47, was executed February 7, 2007 in Texas. Mr. Jackson was a drug addict and unemployed at the time of the murders. The best time and position to tell anyone that you want a divorce, you should be 100 miles away and make the divorce request by a third party. Mrs. Pearl Kiefer lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, with her daughter, Dorothy, and her husband, Richard. In 1957, she was bludgeoned to death with a hammer and sliced, and her body was dismembered. Her daughter, Dorothy, was killed while she was trying to stop her father from killing her mother. Richard Kiefer told police when he surrendered that he killed his wife because she said he was spending too much money for fishing and drinking. Her husband, Richard E. Kiefer, was convicted in 1959 and sentenced to death. He was executed in 1961 at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City. The death of Mrs. Sharon Thurston is the reason why you must heed all our advice. Once you leave your husband, you must leave the state and disappear. He can see the children when they are grown. Let them find him. Sharon Thurston lived in Montgomery County, Texas. She left her husband, Keith Stephen Thurman, and established another domicile. There was a long history of abuse. Mr. Thurman was angry that his wife had custody of their son, and he did not like her living with another man, so he threatened her. He kept his word September 25, 2001, when he used a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun to shoot Sharon Thurston 7 times while she lay on the ground in front of her mobile home. Her boyfriend and neighbor, Guy C. Fernandez, was also shot and killed. When Mr. Thurston was tried for 2 counts of capital murder, he said he didn't kill his wife. His brother testified he heard shots and saw Mr. Thurston standing over Sharon Thurman. Mr. Thurman's son also testified he saw Keith Thurman murder his mother. Keith Thurman was found guilty and sentenced to death. An ex-girlfriend also testified at his trial regarding his treatment of her. He was executed March 7, 2012 at the age of 51. Mrs. Alice Pearson Wilson, age 29. She was a mother of 5 children. Alice Pearson Wilson was killed in 1887. Miss Wilson is one of the first recorded domestic violence victims. George W. Wilson murdered his wife Alice in the village of Alberton, New York. He wrapped a belt around his wife's neck and strangled her to death. The date was Wednesday, January 19, 1887. He was committing adultery. George Wilson was executed in 1889. Deborah Jean Wrinkles was estranged from her husband, Matthew Eric Wrinkle, age 37. He left their home and moved in with her brother, Mark Puckerson, and his wife, Natalie, in their Evanstonville, Indiana home. July 21, 1994, Mr. Eric Wrinkles broke into the home and killed his wife, her brother, and his wife. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Matthew Eric Wrinkle was executed in Michigan City, Indiana, December 11, 2009, for 3 counts of first-degree murder. He knew what he did. This is why he refused all appeals. When he was executed, he said he was not the man he was in 1994. He was addicted to methamphetamines. God bless, and remember, believe in yourself and stand up. Thank you for listening to Women of Courage, and have a great day.